Now, as the name of the video implies, this is the fifth part of a story, so if you haven't seen the first few parts, I'd highly recommend starting with part 1, and if you like it, working your way back here. I'll include a link to all previous parts in the description below. And now, without further ado, let's get back to the story. We find ourselves right where we left off, on one of the dark and dirty lower levels of Coruscant, where Obi-Wan Kenobi sits in a shadowy alley with a small box cradled in his lap, and standing over him is a Moon who has just introduced himself as Hego Damask, and claimed he has a proposition for Obi-Wan, and standing nearby, with his arms folded across his chest irritably, is Maul. It is Obi-Wan who then says, "I tend not to keep up with business and politics, but your name I remember generating quite the buzz on the HoloNet a few years ago, after you were murdered, I believe?" Hego gives a wry smile. "It was Palpatine himself who tried to kill me in my sleep, and I thought it in my best interest to let him, and the rest of the galaxy, think he had succeeded, so I could slip into the shadows and begin to undermine him and his plans at every turn." Kenobi gives a mocking chuckle before saying, "Well, might I say you're doing a fine job of undermining him, considering he's managed to become Supreme Chancellor and seems to be one of the most popular ones in recent history." We see a very brief ripple of anger pass over Hego's face before he looks around and says, "Perhaps this is not the best location to discuss such sensitive matters. I have a safe house not far from here where you can hear my proposition and stay for as long as you like while you consider it. And I shall also have one of my droids meet us there so that he may tend to your wounds." Obi-Wan looks up at Hego for a long moment, then at Maul before putting a hand to his burnt face. He then says, "I'm not sure I have much left to lose at this point, and if you wanted me dead, your friend there would have taken care of it by now. So I suppose I'll come and hear what you have to say." We then switch scenes, and are taken to the busy surface level of Coruscant, where we see Anakin, Qui-Gon, and Dooku walking the crowded streets under a bright blue sky. And even though they're surrounded by members of numerous different species, the three plainly dressed Jedi still stick out like sore thumbs, and, all too often, draw the gaze and comments of those who pass them by. "We should get off the streets, my friend," Dooku says quietly to Qui-Gon, who shakes his head and replies, "This is the fastest way to the spaceport, and it won't be long until the incident back at Padme's apartment is all over the HoloNet, and everyone on the planet is keeping a lookout for us." Dooku frowns, but then nods in agreement before saying, "And then we make for Sereno." It's Qui-Gon's turn to frown as he snaps back, "Are you that eager to reclaim your title as Count?" Dooku chuckles, "No, my friend, I am that eager to be on a planet of beings that we can actually trust." Qui-Gon doesn't argue that, but then asks, "And you're sure they'll welcome you home?" Dooku grins from ear to ear. "We will be welcomed by parades and a year-long celebration, my friend. You shall see." We're then taken a bit higher into the cityscape and see Rigamani perched on a nearby building, watching through the scope on his helmet as the three Jedi navigate the crowds and make their way in his general direction. He taps a button on his wrist and says, "I have eyes on them. Should I engage?" We then see, on a small display in his wrist, the helmeted head of another Mandalorian who says, "And embarrass yourself again and get more of my men killed? No, Rigamani, you failed enough for a lifetime, much less one day. Transmit their coordinates to me. Our client has something special planned." We then switch scenes and get a shot of a rundown old building somewhere on the lower levels of Coruscant before we're taken inside and see a medical droid tending to Obi-Wan as he sits in a small, dimly lit room. While in an adjoining room, we see Hego Damask conclude a conversation with someone over a comm. He then walks over to Maul, who stands nearby with his eyes locked intently on Kenobi, and before Hego can say anything, Maul snaps, "Why do we need him? Together you and I can crush Sidious." Hego raises a hand and Maul instantly falls silent. He then says, "Yes, together we could destroy my old apprentice. Of that I have no doubt. But the situation is more delicate than that. When Sidious is destroyed, we must be in a position to seize power, and perhaps the only way to achieve that now is to use Kenobi." Maul makes a fist as his gaze again drifts to Obi-Wan as he says, "But can we trust him? He was once a Jedi." Hego snaps back, "It is not about trust, but rather manipulation. Sidious no doubt has realized I still live, and plots to stay a step ahead of me. but he will be too arrogant to realize every step he now takes is down a path I have laid out for him. As for Kenobi, Higo now turns and looks at him. He was never anything more than a Padawan, and the Jedi he could have been cannot endure what awaits him. He will break and be consumed by the darkness, and he will become exactly what I need him to become. And when he does, he will deliver me my empire. Maul looks skeptical, but remains silent as Higo pulls from his robes a lightsaber and hands it to him. Higo then says, I have an important and urgent task for you. You must go to the spaceport near the Senate building and help the 3 Jedi fugitives escape. Maul looks ever so confused as he says back, escape? But you say the Chosen One may be among them. Why would I help them escape? Maul then takes the saber being handed to him and looks it over as he says, and what am I to do with this Jedi saber? Higo then lets out a quick, impatient breath before saying, we will soon set another trap for the Chosen One, but for now his escape will aid our cause more than his capture or death would. Maul just continues to stare at the saber in his hands in confusion and disgust, and so Higo explains. A large contingency of Republic forces will be at the spaceport waiting for the Jedi fugitives. You will slaughter those Republic forces using the weapon of a Jedi. After another long moment, Maul's confusion suddenly vanishes, and he says, I understand, and it shall be done, Lord Plagueis. Maul then rushes off, and Higo goes into the next room, where the medical droid is still tending to Obi-Wan. He then shoos the droid away, and takes his seat across from Obi-Wan, and begins, what I am about to tell you will be difficult to believe, but the fate of the galaxy now depends on the decisions we are about to make. Obi-Wan grins and says, and I thought Qui-Gon could be dire. Higo sighs and begins to get up as he says, perhaps I was wrong about you, and the loss of your beloved has shattered the man you once were. Wait, Obi-Wan quickly says, motioning for Higo to again sit. By all means, tell me your story, and I promise I will at the very least entertain this ridiculous notion that Palpatine could be a Sith Lord. Higo seems to debate it for a moment before again sitting. He then begins anew. I first met Sheev Palpatine a great many years ago on Naboo, when he was a young local politician still looking to make a name for himself. But even then his ambition was impressive. Obi-Wan frowns. Well, that's an interesting way to put it. Higo nods. I suppose impressive is an interesting way to describe ambition. But do not forget, Obi-Wan, I am a businessman, or was, and wealth has always been my motivating force. So when I encountered one so driven, and clearly destined to become a true power in the political theater, I saw the opportunity to use his eventual rise to power for my own profit, and formed a partnership with him. Obi-Wan then chimes in, and now you're regretting that decision because, as you say, you've learned he's a Sith Lord? Higo nods and even chuckles. It does sound ridiculous, I cannot deny that. But it didn't take long for me to realize there was something special about Palpatine, something different, and that I was not using him, but he was instead using me. Obi-Wan gives him a coy grin and points out that hardly makes him a Sith Lord. Higo then continues, true enough, but Palpatine seemed to never be wrong, and every deal he made worked in his favor, and before I knew it, he had powerful friends in every corner of the galaxy, and these friends have great wealth and influence, and much to gain from his continued rise. Obi-Wan gives a little shrug. Sounds like an average politician to me. Nothing that would lead me to believe he's a Sith Lord. In fact, by the same token, when you were, still alive, didn't you have powerful friends everywhere? For all I know, you're a Sith Lord too. Obi-Wan concludes with a chuckle, and Higo too chuckles before saying, I see your point, but even the most corrupt politician would hesitate before manufacturing a crisis at the expense of his people and his very own planet, to propel himself into the position of Supreme Chancellor. It was then that I started to realize he was after only one thing, absolute power. Higo pauses, and Obi-Wan thinks for a moment before saying, that whole business on Naboo with the Trade Federation was very convenient for him, I suppose. And if I recall right, your murder did happen about the same time. Higo nods and says, Yes, this is when I realized what kind of being I was dealing with, and tried to get out, but it was too late, and my only escape was to let Palpatine believe he had killed me. Soon after then, Maul found me, and told me everything, and we formed an uneasy alliance. Obi-Wan looks skeptical as he says, To me it seems like Maul very much heeds your commands, which I would imagine is unusual for a former Sith Lord, if that's truly what he once was. For all I know, he is nothing more than an assassin of yours, and every word you've told me here is a lie. Higo then smiles and nods rather approvingly. You are a wise man, Obi-Wan. You would have made a great politician had the Jedi not found you and taken you away from any choice you had in this life. Obi-Wan shakes his head. I've never really seen it that way. Besides, had the Jedi not found me, I would have never found Satine, and Higo cuts him off and says, and had you never found her, she would still be alive now, and the Republic and the Mandalorians would not be on the brink of war. Obi-Wan's face then goes dark, and his gaze momentarily goes to the small box, the one holding Revan's mask, where it sits on a nearby counter. He then says, I think we're done here. I don't need to hear any more of whatever this proposition of yours is. I will have nothing to do with any of this. He then gets to his feet, but just as quickly, Plagueis springs to his feet, and his towering form casts a very dark shadow over Obi-Wan as he says, This is just the beginning, and now is the time for you to decide if you will be a coward and do nothing, or if you will lead Mandalore to victory over the Republic. Obi-Wan shakes his head and scoffs. Even if I could, I would not lead Mandalore in a war and dishonor Satine's memory, nor would I ever wage a war against the Republic and the Jedi. Plagueis then lays a friendly hand upon Obi-Wan's shoulder and says, War is now inevitable, and you should know it has all been a design of Palpatine's, and that soon he will seek you out and take you on as his new apprentice. He will then see to it that you become the new leader of Mandalore, and hence he will control both sides of this war, or so he will think. Obi-Wan grins rather sarcastically and says, That's not a very good plan from a Sith Lord. The Mandalorians would never follow me. Wrong, Plagueis then says. The Mandalorians follow strength, and with Palpatine's training, you, Obi-Wan Kenobi, could show them that strength. You will become his apprentice, learn the dark side of the Force, but forever cling to that love you hold in your heart for Satine, so that you will never become truly lost. And when the time comes, you can lead her people, your people, to victory over the Republic and give them lasting peace, just as Satine has always envisioned for Mandalore. We then see Plagueis, using the hand he has on Obi-Wan's shoulder, give him an ever so gentle push back down into the chair, and Obi-Wan does indeed sit again, and slowly leans back, and in his eyes we can almost see the images of the glory that is now playing out in his mind's eye. When Plagueis then speaks again, as he stands over Obi-Wan, there is a strange reverberation in his voice that is so powerful, some of the objects in the room even begin to shudder and vibrate as he speaks. You will become the apprentice of Palpatine, the apprentice of Darth Sidious, and from him you will learn the ways of the dark side of the Force. And with that power, you will one day build yourself a throne from the corpses of your enemies, the corpses of the Jedi, and rule not just Mandalore, but the galaxy. And when that day comes, you will destroy Sidious and yield to me. Obi-Wan, looking entranced, then shifts his gaze to the box sitting on a nearby counter, and as his eyes lock upon it, a strange red glow seems to emit from within it, and it begins to shake and tremble very violently. Plagueis then says as the whole room begins to shake, Yes, you've already felt the power of the dark side. You know what you can become. Embrace it. Embrace this destiny before you. The box, which continues to glow red, then falls off the counter and pops open, and the mask of Revan spills out. And out of nowhere, a shadowy mist-like figure then materializes in the room and picks up the mask of Revan and puts it on. The figure then walks over and stands next to Plagueis, as it extends a hand out to Obi-Wan, who begins to reach for it. But just before Obi-Wan takes the hand, he hesitates, and that's when we focus in on his burnt and scarred face, and in his eyes is not the reflection of two dark figures, but rather the reflection of Satine. And Obi-Wan then begins to pull his hand back, But that's when Plagueis says, "And you should know the truth. Satine was the target that day on Mandalore, not you, despite how it appeared. It was all a part of Palpatine's plan to turn you to the dark side, to use you in his war." Obi-Wan's eyes then shut, and his head lowers slightly as Plagueis continues. "The darkness of Palpatine is now too great to be overcome by the weak connection to the light the Jedi have. Only one stronger with the darkness can now destroy him, and the pain and anger inside of you will make you powerful with the darkness, powerful enough to destroy Sidious when the time comes." Obi-Wan's eyes again open, and the reflection of Satine still resides there as he says, "Satine would not want this. I cannot." Plagueis then quickly says, "Nor would she want her people to be used and destroyed while you sit back and did nothing." Obi-Wan's eyes shut again, and Plagueis continues, "Revan was once a Jedi who fell to the darkness, but it was love that ultimately brought him back to the light. So shall it be with you, if you are strong enough." Once more, Obi-Wan's eyes open, and the reflection of Satine is gone as he looks up at the strange shadowy visage wearing the mask of Revan, and takes the hand being extended to him. We then switch scenes, and we're back on the surface level of Coruscant with Anakin, Dooku, and Qui-Gon as they draw near to a very large structure with various different types of ships constantly flying in and out of it. Suddenly though, Anakin stops dead in his tracks, which causes the other two to stop and look back at him. Qui-Gon then says to him, "Come along, Anakin, we're almost to the spaceport." But Anakin shakes his head and says, "Something's not right. I can feel it. We need to go back and get Padme. If we don't, something horrible is going to happen." But Qui-Gon shakes his head and says, "I don't sense anything, Anakin. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment." "No," Anakin says back, "we have to go back and save Padme." Qui-Gon sighs and then says, "I do understand you care a great deal about her, Anakin, and you feel like we're responsible for..." Anakin cuts him off. "We are responsible for what's going to happen to her, and I can just feel that we need to stop whatever it is from happening." Qui-Gon seems to consider his words, but before he says anything, we hear Dooku say, "I believe we are about to find ourselves in a bit of a situation." Qui-Gon smirks and says back, "Aren't we already in a bit of a situation?" Dooku returns the smirk and says, "A worse situation, I'm afraid." Qui-Gon then starts to say what could be worse when he suddenly notices that all around them, Republic security forces are closing in and ushering away all the civilians. That's when Dooku says, "Which shall it be, my old friend? Run, fight, or surrender?" Qui-Gon then says, "When did you and I ever consider surrender?" Dooku now gives a full-fledged smile as he reaches for his saber. Qui-Gon also reaches for his saber as he says to Anakin, "Do all you can not to hurt any of them, Anakin. We only need to escape." "Escape?" Anakin says as his head goes from side to side. "There's like 50 of them." Dooku, still smiling, then says to him, "Your master and I have been in many confrontations where we would have gladly taken these odds." Anakin looks like he wants to ask about one of those times, but before he can, one of the security officers, who appears to be a captain, reaches them and points a blaster at them and says, "By order of the Supreme Chancellor, you three are under arrest." Qui-Gon is about to give his response when suddenly there is a blue flash, and the head of the captain is lopped off his shoulders by a hooded figure wearing brown Jedi robes and wielding a blue lightsaber, and that's when all hell breaks loose. Seemingly at once, all 50-some security officers start firing as the hooded figure begins to flow through the crowd and hack them apart in rapid succession, and the only targets the security officers manage to hit are the fleeing civilians. The three Jedi all ignite their sabers and block the blaster bolts aimed at them, taking great care to deflect them up and away from the innocents. Qui-Gon then says they have to stop him, referring to the robed figure, of course, and Dooku gives a nod of agreement and immediately dashes off after him. But before Qui-Gon can follow, one of the security officers, a rather large and well-built one, barrels into Qui-Gon and tackles him to the ground. Anakin is about to make a move to help him when he too is hit and tackled from behind by a security officer. However, as the two crash to the ground, the officer ends up on top of Anakin with a saber through his chest. Anakin then deactivates the saber and pushes the man off of him, and can do little more but offer an empty apology as the man dies a few seconds later. That's when something catches Anakin's eye. The broken old holocron Qui-Gon had kept hidden in his quarters has fallen out of his robes while he wrestles with the security officer. Anakin then for a moment looks like he's going to go and help his master Qui-Gon, but his attention is drawn back to the holocron as if he's heard something from it. And then he force pulls it to himself, and as soon as it's in the palm of his hands, it begins to glow blue and float as it unlocks. That's when we see it project an image of a map of the galaxy, and one lone location is marked on the map. Qui-Gon then gets the best of the security officer and incapacitates him. His gaze then goes to Dooku, who is having his own difficulties with security officers as he tries to close in on the robed figure, who is still slaughtering security officers and anyone else who gets in his way. Qui-Gon then looks back at Anakin and sees the opened holocron projecting the map, and his jaw goes slack with amazement. He walks towards Anakin and mutters something about how that shouldn't be possible, but that's when Qui-Gon notices the officer Anakin is killed, and that another swarm of officers, more than just 50 this time, are fast approaching. "Time to go, Anakin," Qui-Gon says before he turns and again looks to Dooku and yells to his old master, letting him know that more are coming and it's time for them to make their escape. Dooku takes one more look at the robed figure, who is also now fleeing and looks like he wants to pursue, but at the last moment joins up with Anakin and Qui-Gon as the three make their way to the spaceport. And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this part of the story and what you think might happen next. So until next time, thanks for watching.